maybe I don't need to spend too much time on this, right, in this group, but basically the idea is that we're really interested in workforce diversity. And one of the things that's kind of interesting is that colleges are in this really unique position where one goal is to potentially increase the diversity of students, and another is to increase the diversity of faculty, right? Or at least there's concern over that. So I've actually done a lot of work kind of coming into this project. My background was doing a lot of work with the California community college system and thinking about diversity among faculty and students in that context. And what's quite interesting is that the community college system, if you look at the 116 colleges, 2.5 million students per year, that the students are about 51% from underrepresented groups. Then when you look at faculty from those same underrepresented groups, what you find is that the faculty overall are only 20% or 1/5. And so you see this huge kind of disparity in terms of the student to faculty ratio.
How many, what fraction of the population is from underrepresented?
In California, it would be higher. I'm assuming it would be maybe 70% if you looked at high school students.
70?
What's that?
Did you say 70?
Yeah. Okay, so reservations and policies in India are what I would say are the most aggressive affirmative action program in higher ed in the world. What they do is they say that half of India's faculty positions are going to be for essentially underrepresented groups in a sense, but they're really like lower caste or social class groups. And then half of all student admissions are also for those groups, okay? Now, this is built into the Constitution. So the Constitution recognizes groups based on religion, tribal, or social standing. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but we're going to mostly focus on grouping these three categories and thinking of them as like a reservation category versus what's called the general category, okay? But they're the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and the OBCs. Okay, so those are the three categories that are in the Constitution where there are these reservation policies. Now, what it's done is it's eliminated the student-faculty diversity gap, which I'll show you in a second, and it's eliminated the population-faculty gap, which was kind of related to this question here. So if you just sort of look at it overall, the Constitution has done this, and it's very different. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on one part of the higher education system in India, and that's going to be engineering and technology colleges. Okay. Why are we focusing on engineering? There are a number of reasons. First is that these are extensive and growing fields, right? In India, they have a lot of potential for upward economic mobility, especially for lower caste and social groups. And they're huge, right? They're 250,000 faculty, so 250,000 faculty across engineering colleges in India, and 5 million students, right? So this really is just like the perspective. Now, one thing that's interesting is that there are a lot of like well-paying private jobs in India for these types of degrees, right? But there's a fair amount of research showing that there's discrimination in those positions, and so they're difficult for lower caste and other groups to get into. Okay, so then what about in the US? We found some data on this that more than 20% of all foreign-born science and engineering workers in the US are from India. And that appears to be growing fast, right? So that's another thing that's really important. And then it's interesting because there's even some research now showing that there's caste discrimination in the STEM labor market in the US. Okay, so there's evidence of sort of these of discrimination and other things. Okay, so let me get to my paper so I can sort of like get into some of the results quickly. So the key questions. Think of this as being kind of three key questions that we want to look at. First is, do faculty who are hired through quotas, right, which is how the reservation policy works. These are literally separate hiring pools for faculty for reservation category or general category. Do they have lower qualifications? That seems like a first order question that we need to look at. And we're going to provide some really new novel evidence on that. And then what we're interested in as economists is, are they more or less productive, right? And we can condition on the lower qualifications that are observable. And we can also look at this just in general, if you just want to look at the policy question. So I'll talk about both of those. There's sort of like, this kind of limited evidence on this. Holzer and Newmark have talked about how there's clear evidence of weaker credentials, but not so much on the productivity. The productivity part of it is really hard to measure and it's hard to nail down. So I'll show you like our new evidence on that. And then we're also really interested in this literature that I've done a lot of work on in the US on race, is these teacher like me effects, right? So if you're a student of one group and you have a faculty member of your same group, do you do better in that course? Do you do better, staying in that college or that university? And so we're going to look at that. And then very important for the context in India is we've seen a fair amount of like descriptive work saying that general category students really resent this program, right? And they're not happy with, when they take a class and it's with a reservation category faculty member. Yeah.
Is this statement by Holzer and Newmark, this is generally for affirmative action across different settings, not just your setting?
Yeah. Okay, so our analysis plan, let me just go through this also quickly and we can kind of jump into it. And I can definitely come back and answer more questions about all this. One thing we're going to do is we're going to use microdata from the 2011 National Sample Survey. So this is kind of like the CPS or the ACS data to kind of provide some new evidence on that, on kind of broader patterns in the population. Then what we did though, the real contribution is we went in and we surveyed 50 randomly chosen engineering colleges in India to create a nationally representative sample. And so we have data on more than 20,000 students and 3,000 faculty in this kind of like bigger part of our sample. We're only going to focus on computer science and electrical engineering departments, not all of the other departments that are in engineering schools, because those are the biggest ones. Those are the ones, that lead to a lot of these kind of computer programming and engineering jobs that are so important. And then what we found in doing this is that some colleges use algorithms that randomly assign students to classrooms. And this is going to be, of course, key for some of the work that we're going to look at on faculty productivity and teaching, right? Because we don't want students choosing certain faculty members. And also the teacher like me effects also, this is really valuable. And so then, of course, we had to collect all the data, and this took a few years to do all of this. Okay, so let me get at the first question. Do the faculty who are hired through quotas, through the reservation program in India, in these engineering colleges, are they less qualified? If you just look at the population overall, through using the NSS data, what you find is that the minimum category for getting a job in an engineering college is a master's degree. And about 6% of the population that's general category, right, has a master's degree. So it's already a rare skill in the population to be even begin to be qualified to teach at a university in India. And then you look at the three different groups that comprise our reservation category, and you can see there's some differences. I am going to try to do the differences by these different groups, but to be totally honest, we're really kind of underpowered to do that. And so we're going to focus on this one group, reservation category. And if you think of it from the policy point of view, that's kind of the main part of it. But you can see that among reservation category population in India, there's less than 2% that even have a master's degree at all, okay? And so there's a huge disparity here in terms of qualifications, the minimum qualification to be a university professor. Okay, but let's get into our data, our engineering colleges, because we did this big survey with 50 colleges that are nationally representative. And what we find is, yes, as expected, as what Holzer and Newmark talked about, reservation category faculty have lower qualifications, right? So the first thing we looked at is the three different degrees, right? The highest degree is a master's, the highest degree being a PhD in progress, right? And then the PhD completed. And what you can see is that for the reservation category, there's a higher percentage here that have a master's degree and a lower percentage have a PhD. And the kind of ABDs are about the same, okay? The differences, though, are not huge, right? But there is something here. And so that's going to be important to look at. We also looked at professor rank, so assistant professor, associate, and full professors. And you can see the disparity there, that there are more assistant professors that are reservation category and fewer that are in the full professor part. And then just number of years of experience in academia. We also measured that, and I think it's about a year and a half lower on average. Okay, so we kind of answered that first question about the qualifications. In our data, we have pretty clear evidence that there are differences in qualifications. Now let's get to this really interesting question about productivity. Okay. Yeah.
At what level of granularity is this rule applied? Like, is it at the school level? Is it each department needs to have the?
Yeah, so it's done in each department, but of course, that's pretty difficult to do perfectly right when you're talking about 5 faculty members in a small department, right? And there it gets really complicated about the ordering, and yeah, it's not going to be perfect, that's for sure, right? These are kind of overall goals, but it's not done just over at the engineering school, right? So this is like department by department is trying to get these ratios.
Do you think would some of that gap go away if you conditioned on? Well, I guess you're already restricting to engineering and computer science, but like how much of that is like different fields have different standards for having a PhD versus not? And
yeah, I mean, I guess what we could do is just check CS versus electrical engineering. Yeah, that's really all we can do here. But I'll show you the numbers, right? It's pretty close to 50%. Okay, so we have the random sample where students are assigned to classrooms, which I'm going to show you really carefully what that means in this context. The classrooms are going to be things like Electrical Engineering 101, Spring Quarter 2019 at College X, right? So that's what I'm referring to as a classroom. So it's very specific. It's an exact offering. A course, I'll show you, is different. That's going to be like Electrical Engineering 101 at a certain time. Now, this is going to help address identification problems, obviously a selection bias. The students can't really choose their professors, right? So we also do a bunch of balance checks on this, and everything looks very balanced. Another thing that it does that's interesting here for the teacher like me work that I've worked on before is that we can look at actual effects on the general category group, right? Or the base group. That you can't do when you're very limited to difference in difference estimates, right? When you don't have random assignments. So I'll talk more about that later on, and we'll try to do some of the models that include more fixed effects to deal with that. And then another thing that's really interesting in India is classes are graded by a higher level entity. So this would be the equivalent of the University of California taking all the exams from Econ 101 and grading them at that level, right? From all the departments, from UCLA, from UC Santa Cruz, from UC Berkeley, right? And doing it that way. And it's not done by individual faculty. Yeah.
I understand that in India, the elite colleges have their mandatory college graduation exam. Do you have those scores?
Yeah, so we have in the sample, the 12 college sample, there's only one elite college. And we kind of like checked all of our results to make sure that it was totally robust to that one college being out of there. But we don't have those scores. We're not able to get that administrative data. We do, I'll show you some of the stuff that we have on the entrance exams. Unfortunately, only about 50% take those exams because they're national. And what happens is they can also take like state exams. So it'd be like, you take the SAT, right? Or you can take a California version of the SAT or a Texas version of the SAT. And that's the problem, is we don't have the Texas one, the California one, the Missouri one, right? Okay, so let me just go through this because I think this is going to be very important for how we think about measuring productivity of faculty, right? In terms of teaching. So let's just take Electrical Engineering 101. Students enroll in it. Then what's done is they use their algorithm to randomly assign students. And so on average, there are about 3 classrooms for this course, and there are 3 different professors. So it's not done as sections like with TAs, it's done as professors. So the idea might be something like there are 100 students enrolled in Electrical Engineering 101. They don't want class sizes that big. So they're going to break them up into 33 students go in this one, 33 go in this one, 33 go in this one. And this varies a lot, right? This could be, a couple of courses, or there could be 5 of them if it's a big one. And so then they're randomly assigned here, and this is where we get our variation in faculty reservation category, right? So some will be a reservation category faculty and some will be a general category faculty. And then they don't control the grading, right? It goes to this final exam that's at like the University of California level equivalent, right here. And then it's graded and then we're kind of done. Okay. So the regression model, I hope I don't have to spend too much time on this, but basically it's very simple, right? In this context, we have our outcome measures, which I'm going to show you a lot of them. And then we have whether or not
Could you walk us through your subscripts though? Just
subscripts. Sure.
like individual K is,
K is, what is that class?
or
This is classroom. K, I think, is just like the subject, if it's in electrical
Okay.
engineering or computer science. And then F is the faculty. Yeah. Okay, so basically the idea is we're just going to put in a dummy variable for whether or not the professor is reservation category. And then, you know, we can control for faculty characteristics, which I'm going to show you because that's important for if it's more about the policy question or if it's more about just knowing if there are these differences per se. And then we can kind of put in student fixed effects. We can like change a lot of the model. Okay, so starting out with the real base model, what this is the student course grade. The way the grades are done is some classes do like an ABC, but a lot of the classes are just a score, right? So it'll be like 1 to 100. You can kind of see that the mean value here is 51. And so what we did is we just kind of like used the scores and just kind of like ranked all the students in some sense. And so what we actually found is that reservation category faculty, when we don't control for anything else, students enrolled in those classes, randomly assigned to those classes, we're actually doing 1.44 ranks higher. Okay, so, you know, obviously that's very small effect in some sense, but it seems like the prior hypothesis is that, you know, at least in the kind of policy debate, is that these programs are creating instruction that's not as good, right? Okay, so now what happens when I start controlling for these characteristics? So the first set is I control for the rank of professor. So these policies are kind of adjusting over time. Maybe that's part of the difference. And then the second or the third column, controls for the degree. And then the last one, controls for whether or not it's female professor or not. And again, like this is going to be like kind of the second part of the project that I'm going to talk about. But there's some interesting results here. Quite interesting is the highest degree being a Ph.D. is actually showing a negative effect. But I was very happy to see this coefficient. Full professor, 3.18. Right. Martha says that's true, so we're good. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so these results were pretty interesting on their own, right? This one was quite surprising, right? Because this big emphasis on these elite engineering colleges, and there's just incredibly competitive to get in. And there's just, you know, a lot of talk about them and everything. And at least if your instructor comes from one, it doesn't look like that's giving you this huge boost in terms of your course performance. Okay, so now you could say, well, professors could teach to the test, right? In our setting, they really can't because it's this kind of like statewide exam that's being done. But just to kind of follow the literature on this, what we looked at is the follow-on grade, right? So these would be the grades students got the next semester, and it doesn't count the actual one that they got that semester. The idea being that if you learned a lot in Electrical Engineering 101, then when you take Electrical Engineering 102, you're just more prepared and you're going to do better in that class, right? And so we're not finding really any difference there. So it's not that general category faculty are doing better. And then we also did the follow-on course that was more specific to like just individual, like we looked for patterns like the Electrical Engineering 101 to 102 or Physics 1 to Physics 2. No real difference there. And then we just did our own tests. And 2 years into the program, we gave them tests that covered like math and physics. So those are actual test scores. And if you do work in higher education, you realize it's very hard to get test scores, right? It's much more of something you do at kind of K through 12 work. Yeah.
I'll come and I think
Yeah.
you could frame these as maybe report like the chances that you can reject that the effect is negative, because I think that's the part.
Yeah, maybe that's
And
it.
I think that's probably what you want to say, because I think you can reject.
Yeah.
Large negative and pretty effects, negative effects, of pretty meaningful size, like
Yeah.
pretty small effects. So I think that.
Yeah, that would actually be really useful. Maybe what we could do is just have some bars that show figures that show this really clearly, right? Hey, we can rule out something that's, I don't know, a 0.05 standard deviation effect on all of these. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that'd be a good idea. So then we move on to look at lots of other outcomes. We have just this incredible detailed data that we collected and that we got from the schools. One is we wanted to know about motivation, right? So this was one of the comments that I kind of talked about before in looking at some of the more descriptive work or ethnographic work that was done, is there's this concern among among general category students that, you know, they're just not as motivated when they have a course with the reservation category professor. And so what we did is we looked at hours attended. And again, no difference at all. Then we have data on dropouts. Dropout rates are very low. So it's kind of hard to find a big difference here, but it's not like when you take, this is all measured as you take 10% more of your classes with the reservation category faculty over the 2-year period we're studying. They're not, any difference in their dropout rates. But again, that's low because very few of them drop out of these programs. And then we had a question about whether or not you plan to go to grad school. So remember, this is all undergraduates. And so it doesn't really have any effect on that. And then we thought, okay, but maybe what's happening here is the general category faculty are more focused on research, right? And I'm going to show you numbers on that. We even measured that number of publications, what kind of publications. But perhaps what they do is they provide more opportunities for RA jobs or things like that. And we did not find any evidence of that either. Right? You can see about 20% of these undergrads are getting some kind of RA job. So it's actually pretty high relative to kind of normal undergraduate. I think, Adrienne, did you? No. Oh, back here. Yeah.
Just a question about the setting. So you talked about random assignment into these classes, but
Yeah.
I know, like, for example, UCLA students might just go to a different TA section if they like it better or it's more convenient.
Yeah.
To what extent is it like enforced in the setting?
Our understanding, so we were worried about that. Yeah. And it sounds like because they're relatively small, right? They're 30, 35 students kind of on average, and it's a professor, right? It's not like a TA, right? You can kind of jump around week to week, that they're going to the right class, right? And they want to kind of, be there for that professor, right? They want to be seen. Yeah.
So just a clarification question, and I'm sorry
Mhm.
about my ignorance, but is it something that is truly obvious if your professor is in one of these categories? I mean, I don't know. It's
Last name.
all because of the last name.
Yep.
You can turn
Yeah.
that down. I see. Thank you.
Yeah. We asked a lot of people about this.
Okay.
And yeah, last name reveals a lot. And so, and it was interesting because some of the students and the faculty and administrators were saying, yeah, it's very well known. Like, it's just commented on. Okay. So another thing that we have to add richness to this is we actually have another cohort of students where we focused on just like years 3 and 4. But we don't have student grades for these students. So we're somewhat limited on this group. But what we're able to do here is at the end of year 4, we actually gave them an electrical engineering test. We gave them a computer science test. And then, of course, by this time, we've got, we know if they're going to graduate or not pretty much at this point, because they're almost done with the program. And then we know, remember I was saying that I think it was like 20% were saying they want to go to grad school, and now it's way up, right? They're closer to it. It's more real. A lot more of them say they want to go to grad school. But again, for this second cohort of students, right, we're just not seeing any differential. We're not seeing a lower level of educational performance when taught with a reservation category faculty. So one thing you might question then is perhaps reservation category faculty are not as good, and what they're doing is just putting a lot more time into teaching. That might be one, yeah.
Before you get to that.
Yep.
But I asked, maybe you said this and I missed it, but there's a possibility that the reservation students are more motivated and work harder. And I mean, I know my sense about UCLA when I used to teach undergraduates is that the first generation college goers were much more motivated. They were less well prepared, but they were much more motivated, and that overcame their lack of preparation. Do you have any data on that?
We did look at students and looked at the student performance differences, and there we saw gaps. There is some evidence that there's a bit of catch up, right? Because they're coming in with lower scores, lower test scores, lower preparation. But yeah, but that's a whole different project. I mean, that's another part of this project. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So here we're just focusing right now on the reservation category faculty, right? And one question is, but it is similar to what you're saying, like, are they putting in more effort than the general category faculty? And that kind of additional effort might kind of overcome lower quality per unit.
Sorry, just to jump in on this question. So
Yeah.
maybe it could still play a role if the two compensate each other.
Mhm.
So you have the general students who are pissed and doing worse, and the minority students who are more motivated to have a teacher like them and who are putting more.
Yeah, I will get to all those results.
Okay, so
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one quick question. So I think we're interpreting everything as causal because of the random assignment, right?
Mhm.
Do you want to show us, there's no need like some balance tests or anything that shows that the reservation faculty is unrelated to student characteristics?
Yeah, I actually don't have it in this presentation, but definitely I can show you. Like, we went through everything. JE scores, which are like their test scores, baseline, test scores we did, like everything was, incredibly consistent on it. So, yeah, it looks like random assignment was followed. The engineering schools told us this. We said, well, why do you do it? And they said, why wouldn't we? You know what I mean? It was sort of like, this is obvious. We're going to randomly assign our students to these classrooms, and why are you even questioning it in some sense?
So they've always done this. There is no OLS that is done without random assignment. There's no.
You mean that they're doing or that we're doing in our estimation?
No, there's no setting in which the students actually choose and then.
Like you can't show us the counterfactual for the student who self-select.
Yes, that's
The problem you're wishing to solve with the randomization.
No, that's fine. It's fine. No.
Yeah.
If you have it, it's nice to contrast the two to see that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we could
Value.
run those and just check it. Okay, so let me get to these results. So this is just about, oh, sorry.
We just pile on when we get started.
I shouldn't pause for a second.
So I know you're gonna get to the master tests, but
Mhm.
did you get all about looking like multi-regressions or anything here? Could you
We
do
did
that?
all of that also. And I'm just,
Then no.
it's all consistent. Yeah, it's pretty much showing the same thing. The whole distribution, they line up almost perfectly. Yeah. So we're not seeing, oh, it's the lowest quality ones or the highest quality ones where you see these big differences in terms of productivity. Yeah, we checked all of that. So yeah, if you look at the paper, it's pages and pages and pages of appendices, and you know how these, it's sort of like just kept evolving. Okay, so we know how many hours they spend on advising students, course-related work, lesson planning, teaching classes, tutoring. This teaching class, I thought that was a really good kind of fact check, right? It's like, they shouldn't be teaching classes more, right? The number of hours they're teaching the same exact classes. And so that was good to see that there was no difference there. Advising is something that we had heard was a potential difference, is that they were less likely to advise students. And again, we're not.
Wait, who's there in this?
Okay, sorry. So this is reservation category faculty relative to
That's right.
general category faculty. So it's not about students at all. This is just about productivity of workers. Then we also were able to look at lots of other measures of productivity. So, the whole UC system talks about research, service, and teaching, right? And we've just been kind of focused on the teaching part. We can also look at research productivity. We have how many grants they have, where those grants are from, if they're government or not, or private. And then we even have service, like how much administrative service they do. And so we look at all of these. The research one here, our first measure of this is just simply number of publications per year. And you can see the numbers are pretty high, right? 3 publications per year. So I'll show you some results where we start looking at more selective publications, right? Okay, but anyway, what we find here is, again, no differential at all in terms of the number of publications. Here, what we do is we look at international publications. So this is a metric used in India a lot to sort of say, okay, these are higher quality publications, less like kind of like policy reports or something like that. And you can see the average number went down to 1 per year, right? And again, it's not like general category faculty are just publishing a lot more of these high quality publications every year. And then, and I don't show it here, but we also look at just publications that are in like citation index categories. And this number, I think, drops down to about 0.75. And again, we find no difference. So that was kind of a robustness check on the publications. What about funding receipt? About 13% of faculty receive funding over our 2-year period. We found no differential between reservation category and general category faculty in that. And then we looked at service and administrative work. So one argument that was made to us actually is that maybe reservation category faculty are doing a lot more service work, right? Because they get kind of pulled into all these different committees. And that's not what we found at all. 28% of faculty have service and administrative work. And it was, like exactly equal pretty much. Yeah.
I find these results very, very puzzling. In part because I would expect that a lot of the other factors at play, and so the biases in the review process or who you know in your social networks, those types of things are all related to where you publish, whether or not you get funded, what conferences you're invited to, who your mentor was, all of those types of things would matter. And so even if there was no difference in sort of the quality of their teaching or the other types of things they're doing, you might find that there are differences in some of these other measures. So I'm wondering, are there categories, say, for in the same way there are quotas for the faculty, or the quotas for like, this is a funding pool for these types of faculty, and are there other types of things that help counteract some of those factors?
One thing we did is we broke out the funding by like government sources, private sources. But another thing to keep in mind here is that these are engineering colleges. This is not, this would be more like the equivalent to like the CSU system, or in some ways a little bit more like the community college system. The emphasis is much more on teaching. They're not expected to do, their job is not primary research at these universities. We have the one elite college in our sample, and we kind of checked everything against that. That would be maybe the one exception where the focus is much more on research.
Well, I guess you see the gender gap in there that I would expect,
Like that.
right? And so you go back well, maybe not there. I thought it.
Was it on the number of total publications?
Publications per year, but that includes internal, but not once you look at the okay, so.
And then once we go to like
thinking, what are the
more like journal publications and all that, then that kind of goes away.
Okay.
But the expectation is just 1 a year, right? It's just a different kind of environment. Yeah.
I'm wondering how much of this could be explained by, take the whole population of people with master's degrees. Do you have more positive selection into research in the lower castes and the upper castes? Like, could you rationalize that? Do you think there's a lot of labor market discrimination against those groups? So if you had, from the survey data, could you look at, for these categories of degrees, are there caste differences in labor market earnings that could maybe explain, this is the one place where you don't have discrimination, so you get all this positive selection. And
that is actually one of the possibilities of what's going on here. And we looked at that with the NSS data, the population data, and definitely found like a lower return to college in the private sector among reservation category. Right, we can't look at faculty, right? It's the sample sizes are just not there, but just kind of the general labor market, we see that difference. When we look at the government sector, it's the same. There's no differential return to getting a college degree. There are definitely wage differentials, and there is, a fair amount of research kind of documenting discrimination in the private sector. So that could be part of what's going on, right? Is that sort of pushing like higher quality on unobservables, right? Because we have all these qualifications here. And that's pushing them in. So that could be part of the story, right? It's just that it's a hard thing to test. I mean, we kind of conclude that that's potentially what's going on.
Oh, can I say one more follow-up on?
Yeah.
On this point, do you have something like the citations of that work or something? Because like the way that people argue is that, okay, well then these groups have to perform better to meet the same standard because they're judged more harshly, which would then suggest that even though they have the same number of publications, those publications would be better if you could measure their quality with something like citations or something.
Yeah.
Like that. But I don't know, I mean, that's maybe too hard to do, but it's the thought.
Yeah, so in the appendix, we have only publications that are in these citation indexes, right? That are basically monitored or counted. And we don't really find any difference there. But we haven't actually looked at the number of citations per professor. That's hard to do,
Yeah. I know.
right? We'd have to look them all up and all that.
Yeah.
But we have thought about it. It's just, given that the kind of overall differences seem pretty small, we just thought that that might not be the most fruitful thing to kind of pursue, given that it was going to take a lot of time and effort and money to do it. Okay, let me get to are there positive teacher like me effects? Because there's a lot of questions about this, a lot of interest in it. And again, this was kind of my original motivation, because I'd done all this work in the US, and I was really interested in working with this team at Stanford to kind of do this in India. So the model is also pretty straightforward, right? In this case, what we have is our outcome measure, and we're going to regress that on whether or not the professor is from reservation category. And then we'll have an interaction between reservation category professor and reservation category of the student, right? So this coefficient beta 1 tells us something about how general category students do in classes with reservation category faculty. Then this one tells us that differential effect, or the teacher like me effect. So it's just like, how much better or worse are reservation category students doing when they're assigned to a reservation category faculty relative to general students. So this was one of the most surprising to me findings, is that these were actually, slight positives. So the general category students appear to be kind of driving the overall result, right? That they're the ones that are doing slightly better. I don't want to kind of push it too much, right? Because we're basically getting all those zero coefficients on all of our other measures. But at least in performance in that class, where you think you'd see the biggest negative effect, right? If there's this resentment, if there's this lack of motivation towards reservation category faculty by general category students, we're not showing that. And then the teacher like me, there's nothing, right? We're not finding any kind of positive bump, which what I found in the US is there was a huge bump for underrepresented students. By having a community college teacher like themselves. And you can see it's not, it's not driven by any of the controls. We can push this model a lot further, because what we can do is now go to the difference in difference estimates, because we've got the student and the faculty member kind of like moving between classes, right? So we can add that. So we can put in a faculty fixed effect, and then we can push it even further and put in a classroom fixed effect. Yeah, question.
Like teacher like me, is there like maybe from your work or others, differences in like, I just need one person that looks like me to like feel motivated and interested, versus if this is like a 50% difference, it's like, I see my sort of similar teachers all the time, and so just like being put in another one of their classes is not as impactful as like I am in this sea of people that don't look like me, and I get the one person that sort of implied or explicitly tells me that I'm able to do it.
That's actually one of the potential explanations that we kind of come up with in the papers, that could be part of it, is that there's a big difference here between, having this really low probability of having one professor like yourself to here where you're guaranteed that 50% across all classes will be similar to you. That could be part of it.
That doesn't explain why why the general students do better.
Yeah, that's a whole separate question.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, you-
Are there such cases and do you observe all the advisors for the teachers? Because that could give you some bigger preferences.
Yeah, we weren't able to get that. And I don't know how extensive that is at this undergraduate level in the first and second years. We do have the questions though about whether or not they work as a research assistant. And we sort of looked at that kind of like teacher like me effects there and didn't really find anything. And we also have office hours. Actually, I don't think we looked at that, but we could see if they go to office hours more. You know, we could sort of look at some of these outcomes a little bit more, but we did look at some of them, but not all of them. So that's a good point. Yeah, way in the back.
For the teacher like me effect, possibly one thing that I can think of is the like me context is not the same.
Yeah.
Because a student who is coming in who belongs to especially a scheduled caste, scheduled tribe background is likely to be coming from a far more disadvantaged or having faced a lot more barriers than the faculty who is there. So I think that gap of what does like me mean in that context is one factor. But yes, I mean, I definitely think it's interesting to see that the general category students perform better.
Yeah. So your idea is then that the faculty, it means something a little bit different, right? So the faculty are more advantaged within whatever reservation classification they're in than the students.
Having studied in an engineering college.
Yeah.
Often, I don't know what the breakup of SC, ST, OBC in
Yeah.
faculty is over there because those categories mean very different things in terms of the access to a lot of socioeconomic privilege that you might have. And so that like me effect would get diluted significantly based on that. So it's, yeah.
Okay, I do have some results that I'll show you in a second where we try to break out the categories more. And maybe it'll answer your question, but I'm not sure it will, to be honest. Yeah.
Sorry to belabor all this. Can we see your regression results again?
So go forward or go back. I was going to jump to the fixed effects.
Okay, so wait, this is so this is just it's a linear regression, is that what?
Yeah, so we have random assignment. We're just doing a linear regression. This is just the coefficient on whether or not the faculty member is a reservation category. So one way to interpret it is this is the reaction that general category students have, or sorry, their performance in the course.
Sure.
And then this is an interaction. So it would be
Showing
the
difference,
extra
it's
or
not
differential.
significant.
Yeah.
So it's not that the general category people are doing better. In fact, it's showing that there's no significant difference between the two groups.
This coefficient showing there's no like differential effect from reservation category faculty.
Correct. So that
This is showing that overall, still reservation category faculty are teaching slightly better. And if you just look at the general category students, that coefficient tells you they're doing better. So does that make sense?
I think the coefficients so your interaction is saying there's no significant difference.
Yeah.
In the effect of the reservation faculty, depending on whether the student
Yeah.
is a reservation.
So that's
or
the
not.
teacher
So
like
they're
me
the
effect.
same, essentially, it's
Yeah.
having the same effect for the two groups.
Yeah. So
Okay,
this
I
sort of
totally-
idea, like there's a teacher like me effect, there is, we're not showing evidence that there's a teacher like me effect. But that's not saying anything about the reservation category faculty and their productivity overall.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me just show, in the
Can I
interest
just,
of time.
add just one question on the
Sure.
50-50. I had the same thing about the mass of teachers that would be put in, but so what was the situation before? Was it going from like 10% to 50%? Can you exploit a bit of this or?
So are you talking about the reservation
So what was,
policies?
Put in place, the quota?
I mean, my understanding is that it was put in place a long time ago, but then it wasn't until like the 90s that there was a lot more enforcement of it. And I think that it is kind of becoming more and more enforced in some sense, but yeah, it's been around. This is not a new policy. It's not like it was just done the year before we started the study.
Because I was wondering whether you could explain the before after.
Yeah.
too, yeah.
Yeah, we don't have that. Okay, so then these are not very exciting, but the idea is if you're into the kind of weeds of the teacher like me literature, most of the studies are kind of focusing on this model where you have the faculty fixed effects or the classroom fixed effects because you don't have random assignment. In colleges, think about it, students have choice, right? The big exception is in the Air Force Academy that Carol and others have done a lot of work with that. So it's nice to have that power from the random assignment, but as kind of a check on the teacher like me effects, you can see it's actually not sensitive to this at all. Yeah.
So in this US setting, if you look at this, are the teachers giving the grades? Because in this setting, this is somebody else.
Yeah. So that was actually a really important part of the work that I'd done on community colleges. So what I did is I actually went to the community colleges and talked to the deans and tried to figure out, not so much at the course level, but more at the school level or the department level, their reliance on multiple choice tests. And because a lot of community college professors are teaching 10 to 15 classes a year, right? 30 students a class, they're using a lot of multiple choice, right? And so this would not be English literature, right? This would be like an accounting class, which is a huge one in community college, right? Or an econ 101 or a math 101, like they're often using multiple choice. I guess another thing about the community college system is they don't have TAs. So you can imagine. Okay, so not that exciting really. This gets at the point made in the back, right? Is there could be differences. There really are three groups here: the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and OBC categories. We're definitely underpowered to kind of look at each one separately, but we did try two things. One is we wanted to know, was there a different effect from the professors kind of overall on the different kinds of students? So I'll show you that. And then the next one was, what if we just call it teacher like me? So in this case, we're looking at just a scheduled tribe faculty with a scheduled tribe student, a scheduled caste faculty, scheduled caste student, okay? And so these are, this is a student faculty in the same category, and we're just not finding any kind of teacher like me evidence there either. So we really nailed down these specific groups, each one of them. And again, we just say, okay, overall, you're a reservation category faculty. We still see this kind of slight positive coefficient.
Do you have any variation? We're talking about the enforcement, so I'm just kind of thinking about how you could probe this a little bit more. Do you have any variation across schools in the level of enforcement? Like in some schools, it's more than 50-50, in other schools, it's more like, it's more or less. And is there variation like that you can use to kind of get at this?
Yeah, I don't know. We could look into that. Yeah. I mean, it is in the Constitution, so they are supposed to follow it. And
you were saying there's not 100% compliance, but there wasn't always.
Well, so part of the non-compliance is that, you've got lumpiness. So you have 5 faculty, but you're not going to have perfect, right? You need to hire another faculty member. Well, the way, the ordering works, right? It might just not line up. Okay, so what else do? We look at a lot of other outcomes. Let me kind of just go through this quickly. We look at follow-on grades, semester course, academic skills, right? We can look at all these things, and it's very consistent that we're not finding like teacher like me effects when we start looking at that. Okay, so just to kind of summarize this first part of the project. Oh, yeah.
But I think going back to the earlier question in terms of the teacher like me effects, you do reservation by reservation right now, but as was discussed, reservation is a bunch of different caste groups. Like, did you do like caste group match?
We did. That's what the same,
sorry.
that's what that is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's sort of like saying, okay, if you're scheduled tribe, we're only going to count the professor as scheduled tribe to call that a teacher like me. So it's like that would be your only way to identify that effect. Whereas if you're a scheduled tribe student and you take a class with a scheduled caste professor, then that's not going to be part of that.
That's assuming that scheduled tribes are a homogeneous group. But
yes,
they aren't, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we're not even close to power on being able to test, like among scheduled tribes, is there a teacher like me effect? There could be, right? Yeah. Okay, so just quickly to kind of finish up this part of the project then, we're looking at the largest affirmative action program in the world, right? We're not really finding any evidence that reservation category faculty are less productive than general category faculty. If anything, we see this kind of improvement in like the course part of it, and then research and service productivity, grants, all of the different measures that we looked at, the teaching hours that they put in, all seem very similar. And then we're not really finding evidence of positive teacher like me effects. And interestingly, the general category students don't appear to be doing worse, right, with reservation category faculty because of maybe less effort or resentment. And so, I don't want to overstate this, but these concerns over these reservations that have really erupted in some countries, might not be too much of a concern in India. Yeah.
I guess one question would be, going back to some of the discussion before, how much this is true now versus how much is doing the transition from the situation where there was no one to the situation where now there's 50%.
Yeah.
Maybe some of the upheaval is to get to the place where you are now, maybe there were times where this wasn't true or it was something, and this goes back to that comment, like, if it's the first professor here, then maybe that generation was different. And so now you're just describing kind of a new steady state. So you're kind of saying, well, now that we got here, it works pretty well and these fears were unfounded. But I'm just saying the transition, it was different, and that's what maybe changed perception. Maybe it wasn't, I don't know, but you don't know that either.
No, that would be really interesting, right? To be able to get some data over time, like similar data to what we have like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, to see how much this has changed. Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't really seen any good evidence on that. There's very limited evidence that's trying to do this kind of carefully looking at faculty productivity differences. There's a little more evidence on the student differences, right? Looking at reservation category students versus general category students and how they perform. And we have been looking at that a bit. But that's kind of more consistent with what, you'd expect. Yeah.
Maybe you could do heterogeneity analysis at the establishment level, depending on establishment that were good at complying from the start versus establishment that started later on, right? Because then the first one would be the steady state, the second one would be still in the transition.
So maybe try to get some information about colleges and how open they were to this.
When it was implemented.
Yeah. Or how resistant they were over time. Yeah, there might be some information on that actually. Okay, so the second part of this project is we're looking at basically the female teacher like me part of it. Okay, so there's a literature on this. We thought in India would be really interesting because there are huge differences in India, right? So 80% of female students for every male student in high school. So you already see like differential dropout rates there. You see this concern about early marriage, right? And then India has one of the lowest female labor participation rates in the world. I looked it up, it's about 30%, a little over 30%. And engineering, right, is a really interesting place to look. It's a STEM field. There's a lot of opportunities for employability and for increasing earnings parity, right? So that's why we're going to focus on that. In our data, about a third of the students in faculty are female, just to give you some sense. There aren't reservation policies in place that are like in the Constitution, but there's certainly policies in place to try to increase representation, okay? Those are less kind of clearly defined in our context as it was based on caste or social class. Okay, so let's just get to the results then. This project's very preliminary, right? We're hoping to get more feedback on it. We're focused on the interaction, right? So this is female faculty and a female student. And this is the coefficient on their course grade. So this is a ranking, right? So on average, this can be 50. And so what we're seeing is that if a female student takes a class with a female professor in that course grade, which is not defined by that professor, right? Again, it's this kind of overall entity that's doing it. they're gonna go up almost 3 points in the grade distribution. So not a huge effect, but something. We also have the test scores, right? So we're worried that it could just be something related to the class, motivation in the class. But it appears as though they are learning more, right? And what this coefficient is because it's not just one class that we're looking at, right? We're looking at the percentage of classes that they have over the first 2 years, and then we give them this math physics test at the end of the second year. This is saying if we increase the female share of all the professors they take in that first 2-year period, then it increases their test score by 0.03 standard deviations, right? Or sorry, 3 standard deviations, yeah.
And then, this is really interesting, is it also random assignment to the?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and we did balance checks and all that. I don't have them right here, but I can show that too. Yeah.
So Rob, I know you have classroom fixed effects in column 1, which I guess is why there's no female faculty coefficient. But if I didn't have classroom fixed effects because I wrote the random assignment, like what would the female faculty coefficient look like?
I do have it from before, right?
No, it was positive on average, but like,
Yeah.
what is it? Like, we have a very positive for women, so is it like a 0 for men, or is it like also positive for men?
What I remember is that it was a positive, but it was only marginally significant. But female students are doing better, and that was clearly significant.
Yeah.
And it was a good jump.
The average positive female effect we saw in the oil questions mostly driven by female students. Because if we went back to oil questions, I think there was an effect of female faculty that was about half the size. So I mean, it sounds like men aren't losing, but they're also not gaining much from the female faculty.
Yeah.
I mean, my guess from some ocular econometrics, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we could look at that directly. We should just show it, right?
Yeah, because it's just because those custom fixed effects on this.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I do have some results in a second that I'll show you that are separated, right? And some of the kind of more, yeah, let me just get to it and then we can kind of come back to it. But that's a good point because we could just do this by courses too. Okay, so we see some evidence that there is a female, a teacher like me effect based on, for female students and female faculty. We try a huge number of different multiple specifications I can show you if you want. It's a bit of a mess. And then we started looking at the information we have on how they teach, right? What types of activities, how many hours they put into different advising, preparing lectures, teaching classes. And we found no differences there. So it looks like it's very standardized, very similar between female and male faculty. Okay. So one of the things that we want to do in this project is get into some other issues, not just about course performance, but also about confidence and anxiety. So we have these measures. The confidence one is a lot about, I feel very prepared to take an exam in math, or I feel confident that I'm going to do well in a class on physics, things like that. And we don't really find anything going on there. But anxiety is interesting because we do seem to see that if a female student has a class with a female professor, they're reporting a lower level of anxiety overall towards math and physics and, these classes in engineering. Yeah.
There's much sexual harassment in this context. I work a lot in sub-Saharan Africa, and apparently that's like a huge problem at the tertiary level, is like expecting sex for grades and things like that.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, good question.
I can definitely imagine I'd be much less stressed if I had a female professor who's not going to sexually harass me.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us about the anxiety index? What's in there?
So those are questions, kind of like on a scale of 1 to 5, how anxious do I feel about class? But yeah, we could actually check that about how anxious do you feel about going to the class instead of just the material. And there might be one on that about like going to the class. That's a good point. Yeah, we might actually be able to separate those two. Be really interesting. Okay, so you can see the results on anxiety and confidence. And then what we have is we have information about student beliefs, right? So the idea here is all the students were asked about whether or not they believe men or women in these programs are better at math. Okay. And so I'll show you like 2 sets of results here. But interesting, for male students, about 40% say they're equal. Okay. And then for women, it was higher, like closer to 55%. Okay, so that's just sort of baseline. So now how does having a female faculty member affect that? And so what we find is there's actually a positive effect here, right? It's not huge, like 0.1015, but it's all driven by male students. So when male students have a female faculty, they're more likely to now report that they're equally able to do math, right? And whereas female students, we don't really have any evidence that it changes.
No, it goes from like 40 to 43, 42%. Am I interpreting that right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
It's like,
It's still a lot lower.
it's still low.
It's still low. We did kind of think, so we have like this scale of 1 to 5, right? 1 is, well, 0 is like equal, right? Think of it that way. And then there's 1 where men do much better, and then men do slightly better. Female students do, slightly better, that kind of thing. So anyway, we thought another way to do this is what if we just include where they're saying that women do better? And there are actually a fair number of men that say that, right? And then you can see a huge jump here. So this is not just equal, just that one category, but this is actually what we kind of call, we're calling it, I don't know, we've got to figure out a better label, but we're calling it kind of like non-traditional views, right? And then you can see how having a female faculty also has like a positive effect on that. Yeah, so these are pretty new. That's it. Oh, so I'm right on time. Yeah.
Trying to go back to these results versus the previous results, and what it has to do with the share that's already there, which is much more in the female case, or whether there's just a completely different dimension happening with the women, maybe related to like sexual harassment or related to other things that are, I don't know, household related. I don't know, other perceptions of what you have any thoughts about what's going on?
No, do not. Yeah, so I mean, clearly that the sexual harassment thing is something, we might be able to look at more if we can have, I got to look at those anxiety questions more carefully and see if there are any that are focused more on being there present in the classroom versus just kind of more general about taking a test in math or doing homework in math. But we could also just talk to more people there and try to get kind of a better sense on that. Yeah.
Are you willing to conjecture about what differences you might find if you looked at softer fields like in the humanities?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would. I would expect the differences to be the lack of difference that you find overall not to be there in the humanities, because unless they have
for the
same
teaching
kind of universal grading policy, because the humanities, there's much more room for subjectivity.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, that was one of the benefits of, well, we primarily focused on engineering just because of its importance, right? Its importance for upward economic mobility, and its importance for the US too, and around the world. A lot of engineers are coming out of India and they're moving to all these different countries. But yeah, it would be interesting to kind of study these more subjective fields where there's a lot more writing and it's not based as much on a bigger university system doing the tests.